As we race toward more sophisticated forms of virtual reality, it's worth considering the work of Stanley Kubrik, who spent his career probing and solving the questions of immersive storytelling in ways that still remain unique. More than any other director, it's easy to imagine Kubrick's films as worlds that we could explore, as games, or even virtual reality rides where we glide through narrative spaces, intensely involved, but never in control. This is because Kubrick was as much concerned with the way audiences engaged with his movies as he was with the ideas that they were trying to convey. In fact, for Kubrick, these two things were inseparably linked. We often think of Kubrick as a highly stylized director, which he was, but crucially, Kubrick never lets us forget what the purpose of style actually is. Style is a lens that gives the viewer a point of access to the material. It's about the audience, not the director, something that new filmmakers should keep in mind. Today I want to take a closer look at Eyes Wide Shut, Kubrick's final film, and the ways it immerses us in the story of Alice and especially Dr. Bill Harford, a married couple going through a difficult time in their relationship. And this isn't the first film to deal with subjects of love or sex, infidelity, or even secret cults, but Kubrick is intent on making our engagement with these things one of a kind. How does he do that? Well, the first and most noticeable aspect of Eyes Wide Shut is definitely its strange pacing. It's a slow movie, on the level of narrative, but especially in the dialogue. Listening to Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman speak is like watching a dripping faucet. Every word drops out of their mouths with the same lifeless rhythm.
Look, women they basically just don't think like that.
If you see exhaustion in their faces and hear it in their voices, that's because they really were exhausted. Kubrick made his actors do countless takes of every scene, including the ones where they had to break down and cry. This is the reason why Eyes Wide Shut holds the Guinness record for the longest movie shoot ever, but it's also the reason for these utterly unique performances, something beyond tired, beyond giddy, that state of dreamy detachment Kubrick was going for.
At no time was he ever out of my mind.
Now this accomplishes two things. First, it adds to the hypnotic tone of the film. Eyes Wide Shut is based on a novella called Dream Story, and the film certainly plays out like a dream or a drugged-up hallucination. And second, the detached performances serve to block the lead characters from being targets of the viewer's empathy. That makes for a really interesting combination. Let me explain why. From the moment Bill leaves the house after Alice gives a long, wounding speech about her fantasy of sleeping with another man, the narrative conspires across a series of increasingly sexualized encounters to deeply involve you in the unfolding events. First, a patient's daughter confesses her love to Bill, then Bill hires a prostitute, then Bill meets an old friend at a cafe who tells him about a secret sex party later that night. Then, at a costume shop after hours, Bill witnesses the owner's young daughter sleeping with two businessmen. And finally, Bill arrives at the sex party, which is much more intense than he anticipated. All this time, you're experiencing the night from the perspective of Bill, but not from a position of empathy, or even sympathy for that matter. Instead, the viewer engages in what philosopher Alessandro Giovanelli calls experiential identification, in which the result of occupying Bill's perspective while not empathizing with him is that the perspective becomes your own. It's really as if the viewer is playing a virtual reality game of Eyes Wide Shut. This explains why we react to the orgy sequence with such intensity. Kubrick leads us down beat by beat to this moment with precision. We've been pulled so far into the dream that the simple act of Bill putting on his mask, erasing his identity completely, is for the viewer a moment of deeper immersion than the best VR. From that moment on, the experience of the party is as much ours as it is Bill's. There are plenty of things that Kubrik does visually here to draw you in, as he does in his other movies, like using wide-angle lenses or switching to POV shots, most of which are unfortunately too explicit for me to show. But what sets Eyes Wide Shut apart is this systematic effort to swap you in for the protagonist. This is what the whole movie, visuals, narrative, dialogue, and character, works together to accomplish. The masked ball orgy scene takes place exactly halfway through the movie, but you're captured in its world for the remaining hour. What exactly happened? How did you let yourself get in so deep? Your questions are the same as Bill's, and as the two of you attempt to piece together the answers like a dream half remembered, nothing comes up clear. Bill can't reach his patient's daughter. He can't find his friend, Nick Nightingale, and when he goes back to the home of the prostitute, she's gone. Even at the costume shop, things have completely changed. Nothing quite makes sense.
You were going to call the police.
Well, things change.
The information that you can piece together tells a story that's dark and haunting.
I noticed Mr. Nightingale had a bruise on his cheek, and, to be perfectly honest, I also thought he looked a little scared.
Then, at the end, Sidney Pollack suddenly appears again, mirroring his appearance at the beginning of the film, as an authoritative voice to offer an explanation that paints a more innocent picture.
You just might have the wrong idea about one or two things.
You know, Kubrik died only a few days after completing the final edit of Eyes Wide Shut. By that time in his career, a lot of people had written and said a lot of things about his work. People are still doing it. I'm doing it right now. But the viewer is who Kubrik cared about most. And he or she stands where Bill Harford stands, in between the artist's intention, the critic's interpretation, and the actual experience of the movie itself. Eyes Wide Shut, I think, is an ode to the experience, to the raw impression of seeing something marvelous. Kubrik drags you into the movie, plants you at its center, and challenges you to figure out what happened. He was a stylist, but his style was for us. He made some of the best movies of all time, but more importantly, he taught us how to watch them. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching. This episode was brought to you by Squarespace. If you want to make a website and you want it to be a really easy process, Squarespace has some beautiful award-winning designer templates to choose from that makes the process really simple. It's got 24-hour customer service, no upgrades, nothing to install, no patches ever. And picking your domain name is really easy. You can start your free trial at squarespace.com. And if you use the offer code NerdWriter, you can get 10% off your first purchase. Really simple way to make a website. Thanks, guys. I'll see the rest of you next Wednesday.